You're listening to the RetireCoast podcast, where money, business, and lifestyle come together. Join us each week as we explore smarter financial planning, starting and growing businesses, and building the life you want at every stage, from millennials and Gen X to today's retirees.
Welcome to another of our 250th anniversary podcasts, part of our series both on podcasts and in RetireCoast.com's blog site. We've written a number of articles. We're still writing these articles and still creating the podcast to give you a sense of what actually happened in 1776, since we're coming on the 250th anniversary in 2026. It's an amazing story that we're about to tell you about the weapons of war at the time, how they came about, what they were, how they were made, the entire story, uniforms, the things that kept the armies going during that time. And it's compared sometimes, we have done a pretty good comparison with more modern weapons to show you how well these were made back in 1776. This really isn't a story about killing machines. It's a story about innovation and about how well our people at the time, our forefathers, innovated in order to win their independence. So please listen to our dialogue here. I think you'll find it fascinating, and if you like this article, please go to the others. We have a hub, and that is located in the show notes you can find. It's basically retirecoast.com/America's-250th anniversary hub, or just type the whole thing in America's 250th anniversary hub, and you'll see an entire list of all of the articles there. We have put in podcasts in most of these articles. You can also go to your podcast host and you can see our other articles about the women that helped to win the war, the camp followers, about the money. How did the money come about? There's some fascinating articles. I tried to find topics that were not readily available, things I didn't learn when I was in school, but yet I found fascinating. They're just kind of side things, like how do things really work is really the theme here. And who made it work? Who were these people? One of our most popular articles right now is, who were we as Americans? Where did we come from? What do we do for a living? That article itself is just absolutely fascinating. I keep saying that's that term, but it really is. The comments I'm getting back from the people who have read it said, I've never known these things before. And that's true of me, too, and I'm a history buff. So please listen in just a couple of seconds to our dialogue and come back to RetireCoast podcast and RetireCoast.com.
Okay, so when you close your eyes and you picture the Revolutionary War, what's the very first image that pops into your head? Be honest. I'm guessing it's probably that classic underdog setup.
Oh, yeah. The rugged American Minuteman hiding behind a tree.
Hiding behind a tree, right. Taking careful aim with his rifle. And on the other side, you've got these rigid, almost robotic lines of redcoats just standing there.
Just standing in an open field. It's the defining visual. You know, it really shapes how we think about the entire conflict. Yeah. Freedom versus tyranny, chaos versus order.
It feels like common sense almost. The scrappy fighter versus the big, slow giant. But today we're gonna complicate that picture a little bit.
A lot, I think.
We're not looking at the generals or the grand strategies. We are doing a deep dive into the inventory list of 1776. We're looking at the actual physical objects these men were holding.
The weapons, the uniforms, the tools. And when you do that, the story, it really starts to change. It stops being just this clash of ideas and starts to look more like a clash of manufacturing capabilities.
And we're drawing all of this from the RetireCoast 250th anniversary series. They did a fantastic technical breakdown of the gear from 1776. Mm-hmm. So the mission for this deep dive is, well, it's pretty simple. We want to understand how the war was actually fought, dictated by the limitations of their tech. It's a story of logistics.
It's David versus Goliath.
Exactly. But in this version, David has to build his own slingshot in a shed, while Goliath, has a global supply chain and a factory.
That's the perfect way to frame it. The British Empire was the industrial superpower of the day. The colonies were, they were trying to figure out how to manufacture survival on the fly.
So let's start with the hardware. The most iconic American weapon has to be the American long rifle. The source calls it the symbol of the frontier. But mechanically, what made it so different? I mean, to the untrained eye, a musket is a musket.
To the eye, maybe, but inside the barrel, it's a completely different world. The secret is right in the name, the rifle. Most military guns back then were smoothbore muskets. So the inside of the barrel was just a smooth metal tube. A bullet just sort of rattled its way out.
Which means it's not going very straight when it leaves.
Not at all. But the long rifle had these spiral grooves cut into the barrel. That's the rifling.
And what does that do to the bullet?
It spins it. Think of a quarterback throwing a football. A tight spiral cuts through the air, goes exactly where you aim it. A wobbly throw. It just dies.
So the British muskets were throwing wobblers.
They were throwing wobblers. The American long rifle threw spirals.
And the stats on this are just, they're wild for the 18th century. The effective range is a huge difference.
Oh, it's night and day.
Yeah.
A standard British musket, you were barely effective past, say, 75 yards. You weren't aiming at a person. You're aiming at a wall of color.
Wow. And the long rifle?
You could hit a man-sized target at 200, maybe even 300 yards.
Okay, so that sounds like a game over advantage. If I can hit you from 3 football fields away and you can't hit me, why didn't the Americans just win the war in a month?
Because war isn't a shooting competition. It's all about volume and speed. The long rifle was basically a hunting tool, perfect for killing a deer with one shot.
But loading it.
Loading it was a nightmare. You couldn't just drop the bullet in.
Right. So walk us through that. Why was it so slow?
Well, because of those grooves, the rifling. For it to work, the bullet has to fit really, really tight. So you had to use a greased patch of cloth around the lead ball to grip those grooves.
So you're forcing it down the muzzle.
You're forcing it in, and then you have to use a ramrod to hammer it down incredibly tight.
So while you're struggling with all that, maybe your hands are shaking.
The British soldier across the field has already fired 3 shots at you.
Yeah.
A really good rifleman might get off 1, maybe 2 shots a minute if he's a machine. A British regular could fire 3 or 4.
And here's the kicker you mentioned.
Here's the kicker. The long rifle didn't have a bayonet lug.
That little metal piece to attach a blade?
Exactly. It's a civilian gun. It wasn't built for hand-to-hand fighting. So if you miss your one shot, or the British just decide to charge you, you're left holding a very expensive wooden club.
And they're coming at you with 2 feet of steel. That totally changes the picture. You can snipe, but you can't stand and fight.
Not in an open field, no.
Now, this brings us to something in the source material that I found genuinely surprising. It compares the 1776 long rifle to a weapon from World War II.
The M1 carbine. Yeah, it's a fascinating parallel, isn't it?
It seems impossible. I mean, you're talking about a 170-year technology gap, but the source points out the effective range was almost identical.
It's true. The M1 carbine, used by paratroopers in the 1940s, had an effective range of about 150 to 300 yards.
The same as a long rifle.
The exact same distance. It really shows that marksmanship, raw accuracy had kind of peaked. A frontier marksman in 1776 could rival a 20th century soldier.
Yeah.
But, and this is the key, the application was the complete opposite.
How so? The range is the same.
The range is the same, but the doctrine is different. The M1 carbine was semi-automatic. You used it for suppressive fire to keep the enemy's heads down. It was about volume.
How much volume?
30, maybe 45 rounds a minute.
And the long rifle?
The long rifle was about patience. You had one shot.
Yeah.
You had to make it count. It just shows how the same stat line can mean 2 totally different things.
So let's look across the field at that Goliath weapon, the British Brown Bess musket.
Ah, the Brown Bess. Think of it as the AK-47 of the 18th century. It was rugged, it was simple, and it was everywhere.
But as we said, it couldn't shoot straight. Why would the most powerful army in the world use a weapon like that?
Because it wasn't designed for accuracy. The British doctrine was all about shock and awe. You line up hundreds of men, shoulder to shoulder. You fire a massive volley all at once. It sounds like thunder. It creates a literal wall of lead. And then
the bayonet charge.
The bayonet charge, right through the smoke and confusion.
So it's about reliability over precision.
And standardization. This is that industrial point again. If a part broke on a Brown Bess, an armorer could probably just swap it out with a part from another musket.
Because they were made in factories.
Right. If a spring broke on an American long rifle,
you're in big trouble.
You'd need a blacksmith to forge you a new one from scratch. The Americans were fighting with artisanal, bespoke masterpieces The British were fighting with mass-produced industrial tools.
We're going to get deeper into that manufacturing nightmare, but I want to make a quick detour to pistols, because movies always get this wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Every pirate, every revolutionary soldier has a pistol tucked in his belt. How real was that?
Not real at all. If you were a regular foot soldier, a private, you definitely did not have a pistol. The source is very clear on this. They were rare. They were expensive.
Oh, who had them?
Officers, as a status symbol, or, cavalry and naval boarding parties for very specific uses.
And even then, they don't sound very effective.
Strictly a last resort weapon. It's a short, smoothbore barrel.
Mm-hmm.
The effective range was maybe 10 to 20 yards.
So basically across a room.
Basically. And you only had one shot. That's why officers would fire once and then immediately draw their sword. A prolonged pistol shootout is pure Hollywood.
Okay, so let's go from the smallest guns to the biggest. The artillery.
The big guns. And this is where the logistics of 1776 just become painful to even imagine.
We see them in parks today, sitting on concrete, and they look manageable.
They're not. A 6-pounder field gun weighed over 1,000 pounds. A siege gun could be over 3,000.
And there are no trucks, no paved roads in most of these places.
No. You had oxen, horses, and a whole lot of mud. Imagine trying to drag a 2,000-pound iron tube through a spring thaw. The mud is knee-deep. You're not rolling it. You're prying the wheels out of the earth every few feet.
Or in the winter. The source mentions dragging them on sledges.
Yeah, in some ways the snow was better than the mud, but it was still brutal. The famous example is Henry Knox getting the guns from Ticonderoga to Boston. That wasn't just a military move. It was a miracle of engineering and just sheer brute force. Crossing frozen lakes, going over mountains and snowstorms.
It really hammers home that the battle was against the terrain as much as the British.
Absolutely. And losing a cannon was a catastrophe. You couldn't just order a new one. Losing a gun was like losing an entire platoon.
Which brings us perfectly to the industrial side of this. Let's dig deeper into that idea of cottage industry versus industrial might. The British had factories.
Right. Birmingham was basically a factory city. They had assembly lines of a sort. They produced standardized parts. That means your supply chain actually works.
And the Americans.
The Americans had local gunsmiths, individual artisans in their own shops. The source details the process. It's exhausting just to read about. To make a barrel, you had to hammer weld a flat strip of iron around a rod, inch by inch.
And then hand cut the rifling grooves inside.
By hand, with simple wooden jigs. It took days to make a single rifle, and because of that, every single one was unique.
So let's say I'm a soldier. My trigger breaks, I find a spare part from a fallen comrade's rifle. Can I use it?
Almost certainly not. It won't fit. You can't scavenge parts. That lack of standardization is a commander's worst nightmare. Every soldier is carrying a unique machine.
Wow. Okay, speaking of supply, we have to talk about gunpowder. The source had a detail here that, well, it's not something you usually learn about.
You mean the outhouse detail?
Outhouse detail. Let's unpack that, because it sounds like a joke, but it was deadly serious.
It's a perfect example of just desperate ingenuity. You need 3 things for gunpowder: sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter.
Okay.
Charcoal's easy, you burn wood. Sulfur, you mostly have to import, which was tough. But saltpeter potassium nitrate, that was the real bottleneck.
And where do they get it?
It forms naturally in nitrate-rich soil.
Mm-hmm.
And the richest soil for that is in caves, dry cellars, and famously the dirt underneath privies and outhouses.
So the fight for independence was literally fueled by waste.
It was a dirty business. They were scraping the floors of stables and latrines to get the chemicals they needed to fight the British.
That is just incredible dedication.
And making the powder itself was so risky. You're grinding these volatile chemicals together.
Explosions must have been common.
Very common. The source says they had to keep production in small, isolated batches, in barns or sheds. Ugh. So if one blew up, it didn't take the whole town's supply with it.
So it's not just the Redcoats you're worried about. It's your own supply shed turning into a crater.
Exactly.
Let's pivot to the stuff that isn't a weapon. The source makes a really bold claim. Armies spent more time digging than shooting.
Oh, that's historically accurate. The hidden weapons of this war were the axe, the saw, and the shovel. You had to build fortifications, clear roads for those cannons, build huts for the winter.
So a soldier without a shovel was basically useless.
In many situations, yeah. If you can't dig in, you're exposed. If you can't chop wood, you freeze. The axe was as vital as the musket.
And then there's what they wore, or what they didn't wear. We have this image of the blue Continental uniform.
That came much later. In 1776, there was no uniform. Not really. It was a complete patchwork. Men wore what they had: linen shirts, work clothes.
And the hunting frock?
The hunting frock is iconic. It's basically a long, loose linen shirt, often with fringes. It was practical, it was cheap, and it was distinctly American.
And there's a great detail about how they colored them.
Yeah. The source mentions they would dye them with walnut hulls.
Well, why walnut hulls?
To turn them brown. It was natural camouflage. Now, compare that to the British.
The Redcoats.
The Redcoats. That uniform was designed for visibility, for intimidation. A wall of red coming at you is a psychological weapon. It says, we are disciplined, we are many, and we are not hiding.
But in the forests of North America?
In the forests, it basically said, here is exactly where you should aim. The Americans were blending in, the British are standing out. Their lack of a uniform actually became an advantage.
This source also gives credit to the people who kept these rags from falling apart, the camp followers.
Yes, a group that's often just written out of the story. These were often the wives and families of the soldiers, and they weren't just tagging along. They were essential personnel. They washed clothes.
Which sounds minor, but...
It prevented disease, typhus, dysentery. Disease killed more soldiers than bullets did. They mended the uniforms. When a soldier has one shirt, the person who can patch it is keeping him in the fight.
To bring this all down to a human level, the source has this fictionalized diary entry from a soldier named Tomas. It really struck me.
It captures the mindset perfectly.
He talks about crossing the Delaware, but not the glory of it. He talks about the fear of wet powder.
Wet powder means death. That's the line. It's such a primal fear. If your powder is wet, you're defenseless. You're just a man holding a stick.
And he compares himself to the Hessians he's about to fight. He sees their bright uniforms, and he looks at his own walnut-dyed shirt, but he doesn't feel inferior.
No, he feels pride.
No.
He says it's finer than any officer's coat because it's the garment of a free man. And that it synthesizes the whole conflict. The British had the industrial advantage, the standardized gear. But the Americans took their lack of it, their hunting shirts, their slow rifles, and turned it into an identity.
So what does this all mean for us? We started with that classic image, but after this deep dive, the victory feels, it feels almost miraculous when you look at the supply sheet.
It creates a much richer respect for what they achieved, I think. It wasn't just a war of bravery, it was a war of supply chains. They had to figure out how to make gunpowder from the dirt under their feet.
Right.
They had to drag cannons by hand. They were fighting an industrial machine with handcrafted tools.
It really was a victory of adaptation. The British had the best way to fight a European war. The Americans had to figure out the only way they could fight an American one.
Precisely. They used the rifle's range to disrupt. They used the terrain to negate the bayonet. They turned their lack of uniforms into camouflage. They took their weaknesses and found ways to make them irrelevant.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought from the source. And it's a bit of a provocative question. We talked about how the long rifle was so accurate, so superior to the musket in precision.
Mm-hmm.
But later in history, armies, including the U.S. Army, they kind of moved back towards smoothbores for a while before rifling became standard. Why? If the rifle was so perfect, why didn't it just dominate?
It raises that question, right? Is individual perfection actually less valuable in war than mass-produced reliability?
Mm-hmm.
The long rifle was a masterpiece, but you couldn't equip an entire army with it. The musket was mediocre, but you could put one in the hands of 10,000 men and keep them supplied.
It's the lesson of scale.
Sometimes good enough and reliable beats perfect but difficult.
That is definitely something to chew on. In war, and maybe in everything else, logistics really does win.
It usually does.
That's all for this deep dive into the arsenal of 1776. We'll see you next time.